question we wanted to address this afternoon, also knowing that quite a few of you in this room come from a context where there is an armed conflict ongoing, or where the situation is politically tensed or really heavy in terms of emotionally heavy. We also wanted to ask you, Yael, how you teach IHL in a context where there's such a heaviness in terms of political emotion, let's say.
Okay. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to share these experiences and to hear from you and to see all of you here. So, yes, politically tense situations, that's where I come in. I'm the director of the International Criminal and Humanitarian Law Clinic. We've had a chance to present with the other clinic directors that were here the difference or uniqueness, not said negatively or positively, is that my clinic operates in a protracted conflict, intergenerational conflict. We have punctual wars once in a while, but this is a continuous situation, and this has repercussions as to teaching international humanitarian law and related areas. So when this question was presented to me, I was thinking, how could I present the complexity or give you the most of it? So maybe I can, with the short time that we have, a few minutes, touch on the objectives, some of the challenges, and maybe the nature. I'd like to also perhaps speak especially to those who come from conflict situations. Every case is very specific. But for those of you who teach outside these conflict zones, then perhaps I can relate to what Professor Sassoli has said before, when you have one student from Palestine, or one student from Israel, or one student from Sri Lanka, or one student from Syria. So in our situation, in our clinic, everyone is from this one situation. So you can imagine the variety, the diversity, how interesting and challenging it is for me, and gratifying also for me personally to be able to teach these people, and some of them have a lot of experience, more than me or different than me, and then I can also learn, etc. I also walk into the beginning of the year. That's actually the year is going to begin, the academic year, in less than a month, in a few weeks. And so I walk in with one idea, and I might end up, I don't know how I'll walk out. I know how I walk in. The objective, my personal objective in founding this clinic, in running it, is mainly almost never to tell my students what to think. I never want to do that, but I want to make them think. I want to make them challenge their ideas, because they come into the classroom with a lot of ideas and a lot of preconceptions, personal experiences, and I want to make them be critical about what they think. I don't tell them what to think. They can think left, right, it doesn't matter to me. So I want to give them the tools to think, to go beyond the political discourse, to go beyond what they read in the media and hear on TV, and to really to go through some kind of sincere and genuine process, and to understand that it's a process. So what we do in the clinic is, first of all, it's a course, like how. There's a course in international criminal law with specialization in international humanitarian law, and a new branch, transitional justice. So this all relates, because for me, I don't see really borders, so you need to know these laws, and they're going to be applicable, especially if you're living in a conflict zone. You need to know everything, because we start with the problem. If you said you can teach through the problem, we have all these problems, and then how do you treat them? And you need different tools, and you need to understand the difference between these different tools. So we have a course. In order to make the course more alive, there's a moot court also, and it's the question. It's internal to the clinic, and it's internal. It's divided throughout the syllabus, like the questions, and of course we keep to practice, etc. But beyond the course, students participate in practical. Receive practical experience, because it's a clinic. It's a law clinic. So that's the advantage. And the idea is to expose them to the widest range of practitioners, so the widest things they can do in this field. And for me, there's no real taboo. There's no one, or I can't imagine someone that I would say you can't come to the clinic, or we choose our projects with international organizations, international criminal tribunals, government actors, NGOs, civil society, individual attorneys, possibly victims. It's one of our objectives growing into transitional justice. But to bring people on and to expose them to the students, there's almost no one I can imagine to say, no, you can't enter here. There's no banning, there's no boycotts, there's no taboos. There are core rules, and this is for my students as well. Core rules of you can say what you think, but you have to do it respectfully, of course, and you have to base it in law.
May I just make one remark on what you said, because it also came up in a conflict area and so on. I admire what you do. Unfortunately, my experience is it doesn't work everywhere. A reserve possibility, which I experience can work, is to have a case from somewhere totally else. So it depends very much, but ideally one should do what you do, because as you know, I think IHL is about here and now, about your enemies, but in my experience, sometimes the conflict is so deeply felt that at least I have not been able to take the conflict, but a faraway conflict, and the message is then often the same, and at least intelligent people, they immediately made the link. But it didn't lead to polemics.
Professor Bias, when you teach international humanitarian law in a context of conflict, it's very important to use the course, I don't know if you agree with me, to use the course as a forum for dialogue, and in that sense, possibly reconciliation or understanding at least the other parts. Do you believe, and what will be the best strategy for achieving that in those scenarios? To use the course, to use the forum of the class in a way that you will allow students to express themselves, learn about the other, and in that sense be like a seabed for reconciliation.
Yeah. Do you think that your class can be used as a forum for reconciliation?
Well, thank you for this question. I think reconciliation is a big word, and it's very ambitious. I think there's so many steps that we need to do before that, and especially when you're inside the conflict zone and when your students are from a not varied enough background, but a lot of personal experience, let's say. They come with a lot of baggage. So the first challenge is really to create a safe place, and I think Olivier mentioned that. A safe place not only for education, but especially in a conflict zone. And a safe place means, in a conflict zone, in a sensitive place, it means that people are listening to the smallest terminology that you are using to see, and they're waiting to categorize you, and did you use this term or this term? And it's really the objective is to build a safe place, a place that is credible. The fact that it's non-political, non-partisan, that's something you need to own. You can't just say that. And it's a continued process, I think, and I hope we'll continue to be doing this. This is one of my hopes for the future for this clinic, is that it will continue doing what it does, to create this credible and safe place where people who are affected by conflict personally, directly, either in their personal lives or professional lives or whatever, in their different capacities, and they can really go through a process. Reconciliation is also a process, but maybe what we're doing is the ground, is setting the stones for this future thing. Because one of the main methods that I apply is to make my students think about their conflict by learning from other conflicts. Because then they have this step backwards, and then afterwards come back and apply it. Is this relevant? How would this be relevant to our conflict?
I teach a standalone course on IHL in University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. But since the end of the conflict, in 2009, there is lesser interest on the part of the students to register for the course because it's also optional. And there seems to be more interest in studying transitional justice or human rights as opposed to IHL. So in such a context, my question is, how do you promote the IHL course and allow more students to have an understanding of IHL? Thank you.
I come from Peru. Similar discussions about reconciliation as with Colombia back there. Similar context, but Peru is in its, I guess, 20th year of reconciliation process post-conflict. And so, despite that, not many courses about IHL have been opening. There are some few here and there, but it's not something that you would say, oh, how many courses are there? And so I've been bugging my university for 3 years, telling them, let's open a course, and they finally said yes, and they gave me this question that made me think a lot. Do you want to make it an elective or a mandatory course? And I'm not sure I know I have the answer, because of course, if you enroll in the Geneva Academy, you have an interest in IHL, you are willing to question some things, or maybe you even know already a lot about it. But especially in countries like Peru, like Colombia, Israel, so much of so many people's lives and identities are based on the idea that no, there was no armed conflict, and international humanitarian law is this thing that the communists used to, and it's their identity, it's what they believe. So if I make it an elective, I risk not having enough students and not opening the course. If I make it mandatory, I will get these people that will come with very personal stories of, we cannot accept that this is an armed conflict. And how can they pass the courses? So my dilemma here is, first of all, if you have any thoughts on, I don't know how it works in other conflict countries, but is it better to make it voluntary, elective, or mandatory? And if, depending on the option, if the strategy changes, I like the idea of the safe place, the polemics, but what do you do with these people that have their very own identity, military families, long-standing military families that simply will reject it from the start?
Maybe we can merge somehow the first two questions on how to, on one hand, get students interested, and especially in some areas where you get the feeling that IHL, there's less and less interest, and at the same time that discussion on elective versus compulsory courses and whether that has an impact. You're making my job difficult because I know all of you can answer those questions. Anyone wants to take that?
Before I answer, just to say, when we say we study other conflicts, we study Sri Lanka, we study Colombia, we study Peru. I take students and we try and put this in practice, so they have to be think tanks for the UN, and they have to write a memo on different conflicts. Each group works on one conflict, they have to study it, what mechanisms were there, and then they have to tell the UN Secretary General, UNSG, this is what you should do, this is what mechanisms you should promote, so it's legal, but how it affects conflicts. I wish I had, you're in a good place. I wish I had this problem, but I think the way to realize, if everyone is interested in transitional justice, then personally, I would say, what is transitional justice? It's understanding how we want to treat past injustices. We can call it violations, we can call it grave breaches. That's IHL. So how we want to deal with these injustices in order to look forward, towards the future. So if you want to do that, you can start in the middle. It's, let's say, learning about the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, for former Yugoslavia. And you can see, okay, one of its specializations, its expertise, was case law on war crimes, on IHL. What's NIAC, etc. And what were or are the effects of this tribunal, very special tribunal, on the conflict in the Balkans? And so this could maybe help students who are your future generations take part in the decisions of what your country should do. Should it go to the criminal procedure? What are the effects? And you should learn about this. And if it's a criminal procedure, is it international? Is it domestic? About you, sir, people coming with very strong opinions and very strong identities. This is something I have experience with in the class. I think it's a tone that you set from the start, and that you, in every rule that you do, you have to do it candidly. You have to be 100% with it. And I make everyone understand that I'm very respectful and I'm very appreciative of their emotions, of their past, of their personal experience, of their traditions, of their beliefs and their identities. If they believe that this conflict cannot be an international conflict, that's fine, but justify it legally. You're in a law course, so you have to justify it legally. And also, I would make them think, why are they holding on to this stance so fervently? Why is it so important to them? What are the consequences of choosing this? I mean, we're in a classroom. We can imagine, we can get out of it. Outside, you can say, this is not IAC, okay. But in this classroom, let's try and explore what the consequences, legal consequences, and maybe societal consequences of saying, it's a non-international armed conflict. Okay, this means 1, 2, 3. We will try people for combating or not trying people for combating. We will stigmatize them, terrorists or not. Or we would say this is international armed conflict, maybe, and then they're either combatants or non-combatants, but they're either criminals or non-criminals, depending on the methods, the means, not the ends. So, tell them just try and be less. Try and be younger. Your students, I think, are younger than you. Just tell them you're younger than me. Be a bit more explorative. Let's just think together. Nothing will happen if you explore. And afterwards, you can leave this class with your opinions. It's fine.
I'm going to take the opportunity to answer the Peru, Colombia, Sri Lanka issue. There's a nice coincidence here, but one of the issues that some of you may be following is that, of course, there is a Sri Lankan who may be prosecuted in Colombia under universal jurisdiction. And I think that if you're asking, how does one approach teaching this in Colombia or Peru when people don't necessarily want to talk about the laws of armed conflict as they apply in Peru or in Colombia, is to start to talk about this in terms of global justice, that there could be, to flip the example, a Sri Lankan who comes through Colombia or a Colombian who comes through Sri Lanka. And students ought to be interested in issues of global justice as to how you would prosecute that. So without reopening up the whole question as to what was the armed conflict in Sri Lanka all about, you can, as has been suggested, talk about the conflict in Colombia with a view to seeing whether Sri Lankan law would allow for such prosecution. And I just sort of jotted it down that instead of thinking about this only, and it sort of comes back to the other thing you asked me to talk about, only as a question of IHL, it's a way, for example, in Peru, Sri Lanka or Colombia, to teach about the relationship between national law and international law. To what extent are these international crimes prosecutable at the national level? It's a way to talk about the international law of jurisdiction or the international law of immunity or the international law of non-intervention. Can Sri Lanka complain that Colombia is doing this? Is that a sovereign right that's being violated? And so instead of maybe spinning the class as, maybe the ICRC is not going to thank me for this, an IHL class, maybe it's a class about international law and questions of armed conflict. And then it becomes more justifiable as compulsory, and also you would attract people who might be interested in questions which are, more useful day to day afterwards. The relationship between international and national law through an IHL prism could be a great way to just teach that topic.
Now, I have a question to you. It's a genuine question. Because ideologically, I fully agree with what you say. But where's the limit? And it was not in a conflict area. It was in Montreal after September 11. There was a student who brought the famous conspiracy theory you must be familiar with, that all the Jews were evacuated before the... And then I thought, I cannot react as you suggest, but I said, look, if it is on facts, because on law you may have all opinions possible, but on facts, simply to say, I'm not an expert on facts, and obviously if you are right, then it's a crime against humanity, and so on. I felt that somewhere, as an IHL professor, I also have a responsibility to say, this is wrong. And I can't accept this. Because otherwise, somehow, why do we teach? Everything is possible. Why should not someone say the Holocaust never happened, but all on the contrary, and so on, or the genocide in Rwanda and so on? But how do you deal with such things while remaining not authoritative and say, now I'm the boss and I tell you in this class we don't discuss this case?
Thank you for the question. I think there is a limit also for what you accept. The answer, the how do you react, it depends on the situation. It's not a one. But I would say, you know, this is like a court of law, this classroom, okay? So your evidence right now on conspiracy would be rejected. It has no value here, conspiracy. I don't listen to conspiracy. Talk to me in something else. If you want to convince me, you know, and the example you gave, sir, is different. You know, it's a position, of course. Absolutely. But I do agree with you that I believe there is a limit to, you know, freedom of speech. And legally, there's also a limit to freedom of speech. So I didn't invent the wheel. But, you know, in your example, your student will become your best student. If you tell him, maybe you're right, convince me, he'll become your best student, you know.
In my experience, and the question came earlier about the cross-cultural or the intercultural dimension in different teaching methods, it's something we can come back to. I've had to work with either both professors and students who were extremely opinionated about certain things. And trying to loosen those opinions, the only way possible was to remind them and help them in allowing discussion to happen. And very often it is at the cost of the content of a course as it is described in the syllabus. Very often I've had to tell professors, well, if you're having this problem and it is really hampering the learning, then you need to take half a class out and say, for half the class we're going to do something completely different. We're going to try to find a common space where we can have a conversation that is constructive and where everyone feels included, and then continue with the content of the course. The most damaging is to forge ahead on the content because you believe you must cover it all in that course. You can't finish the course without everything. And actually, the students learn very little and have a terrible memory of the course because they were not listened to, they felt marginalized, they felt that only the strong voices got to speak up, and they felt that the majority of the class was simply not respected. Then you've actually lost the entire course. I'll end with that.